Welcome back to Social Pulse Podcast Retail Edition, where we're digging into the challenges, successes, and the stories of social media community professionals in the industry, just like you. Subscribe to gain valuable insights that you'll be able to apply to your own work and social presence from each and every episode. Now, listen. Are you stuck in a comfortable routine with your social media marketing? Sure, your current strategy works fine, but deep down, you know you're playing it safe. Every day you see other brands pushing boundaries and capturing attention while you stick to the same tried and true formulas. You worry that if you don't innovate, you'll eventually become invisible to your audience, but the fear of changing what's working holds you back. How do you break free from this cycle and push your marketing to new heights without risking everything you've built? Today's guest knows exactly how to navigate this challenge. Joining us is Nathaniel Jones, Director of Marketing at Farm and Home Supply, where he's built a reputation for bold, innovative campaigns that consistently capture customer attention. With nearly 2 decades of experience in marketing and digital strategy, Nathaniel has transformed multiple retail brands through his creative approach to consumer engagement. From viral Super Bowl commercials to breakthrough social media campaigns, he's mastered the art of calculated risk-taking in retail marketing. And today, he's here to share his insights on how you can do the same. Hey, Nathaniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Terrific. So glad I could have you here today. I know we're going to get a ton of value out of this conversation. I'd love you to start by just talking about what sparked your realization that, quote unquote, playing it safe just wasn't going to cut it anymore in retail marketing.
Sure. It was about 10 years ago. I think I was seeing stagnant growth and on social and no really energy behind it. And then have you ever heard of Gary Vaynerchuk before?
Of course. Absolutely.
Okay, so his stuff started popping up in my feed, and I started really listening. And then it was like an aha moment that I had is like he pointed out, like, why would someone pay attention to your content if you yourself don't want to make it? And so that kind of clicked with me of like, hey, I probably need to start making content that I would be interested in, because social media is obviously supposed to be social and supposed to be personally relatable. I think a lot of times us as marketers, we get always to business initiatives of pushing out what we feel the business would want to without any regard of how it's being consumed. And so Gary Vee helped me realize of like, first we need to make sure that we're being relatable as a business, because we have to get attention that way. And that's what social media is built for. So we need to be our own media company, produce our own content, and be our own influencers for that content.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's in fact obviously a concept we've embraced here at Grow Pulse. I've got 4 podcasts. We are definitely a media company here, so I appreciate that insight. Could you walk us through, just to get started, a specific campaign where you think that, or you felt like taking a creative risk really paid off for Farm and Home Supply?
Sure, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's to creative itself, and other times I think it's the budget that we put behind it. So I'll start with creative first. You know, traditional retail marketing thinking is that TikTok's only for kids and college kids. But what about 65-year-old gardeners? It's kind of unique. We did a test with how-to videos with our resident plant expert, and it's driven insane growth on TikTok. And we went from basically having 0 followers to having thousands across the country pay attention to this series that we did with our plant expert. So it's kind of reverse thinking of we always have to keep up with the trends and the whippersnappers that are on TikTok, but actually the fastest growing demographic on TikTok is 50 plus, because the younger kids are already there. And so the incremental growth is going to happen as it agifies essentially. So budget movements are probably more risky of like where you move your money in order to get that attention. But last year in Q4 and Black Friday, we decided to move money away from traditional marketing being broadcast TV and radio towards social, specifically towards YouTube. And we saw a record Black Friday in order to make that happen. But that can be risky too, of not only making the decision to do something different from a content standpoint, but from a money spend content.
That's fantastic. Could you elaborate a little bit more on exactly what you guys did on YouTube?
Yeah, so YouTube's unique because, as far as I know, it's the only video platform that you can measure in-store traffic. And so with the majority of our business still in brick and mortar, it's tough to evaluate that. And I know we'll get to that here in a second of how do you evaluate the performance of social media. But with YouTube, which I would consider as social media, you can see based on the Google My Business locations, the amount of in-store traffic you're driving with the videos. And so with that analytics, it helps prove, hey, we moved this money, spent more money on YouTube, drove in-store visits, and then surely your sales will follow if you can see more people coming into your stores.
So folks are watching the videos and then clicking through to the location to figure out where they could actually go to purchase that product.
Correct. And I think if
Wow.
you are a little bit wise from a marketer, you're going to know to advertise to people, especially who are around in your store area. So be smart about your targeting, right? Not only are you going to
Right.
do niche targeting of if I make a video about shoes, go after people shopping for shoes, but number two, make sure people can buy your shoes in a brick and mortar area. If you're not just e-commerce, pay attention to geography too.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. I definitely want to get into how we're measuring success. But first, I was curious how you're balancing this need to innovate with what works, that tension that I talked about at the outset of the show. How are you handling that yourselves?
So I'll kind of frame this in two ways because there's no one size fits all and it's all up to your own personal preference. But if you feel stuck and lost, it's probably going to be I'm more willing to innovate than not. Now, if you're successful, I kind of like the 80-20 rule of 80% of your time and money spent on what works, 20% on innovating, because the next evolution of what works is what doesn't work, and you don't want that to happen. So you always have to innovate, in my perspective. But it's just maybe not a lot of your time. If you're already finding success in 80% of what you do, keep on doing that. But again, if you're stuck and you don't have the energy to keep moving, kind of like we talked when we opened the conversation of nothing's working, or you're going to have to try something different rather than keep doing the same old, same old.
So, as they say, desperation is the mother of
Of
invention.
innovation.
So,
Correct. Yes.
that's right. So, what's your process then for identifying opportunities to innovate, to push creative boundaries, to take risks?
So I guess, Mike, you yourself, are you ever satisfied with what you do and just want to lean back and go on vacation and not do anything else?
Never.
Okay, so that's where I'm at. I guess I'm never satisfied. I'm super competitive, even against myself. So it's always, can we beat that? Is always the question. It's the elephant in the room of, yeah, we did this yesterday, but what do we do tomorrow that makes a difference? In retail, you can't just sit back and do nothing. So in pushing that, it's trying to find ways. How can we top last year's success, last week's success, yesterday's success, and maybe looking for somebody who's doing it better and then trying to tweak that idea for our own brand. How do you make that unique for what your audience would want to see or that your company would want to promote? So it's never being satisfied.
Got it. Got it. So you're pushing yourself, and I imagine you're pushing your team, but you still have got folks that you've got to report to, and for folks listening that they might not be in a director position, they might have to report to a director. How do you get buy-in from those kinds of stakeholders when you want to take these kinds of risks?
Yeah, I think it's communication. It's always about communication, whether that's with communicating the higher ups or your own team members or your audience. It's always number one step of getting feedback. So if it's kind of toeing the line on being controversial, then I'll bring it up to my owners of like, is this a good fit for us? Is this what we want to do? And if not, we kind of move on from what we might have planned. It's imperative, I think, that marketers always be adaptable. So to evolve, if something gets shut down, go to something else. If something isn't working, go into something else. So that's one, at least in my opinion, the most important part of being a marketer is being willing to change.
On a previous episode, I was talking to the guest, and they were suggesting that one of the challenges and the traps that folks fall into, particularly if they want to innovate and improve, is comparing themselves to others. And he was framing it as that was a negative thing. I don't know how you feel about that. If you find yourself comparing, your brand to others and looking at them,
Mhm.
kind of like I said at the outset, or if you think that's not a good idea.
Always. Yeah, especially if you find their stuff interesting. So kind of
Mm.
like when we opened up of like make content that you yourself would want to watch, there's a million different niches that you can serve. Our company itself, we sell everything from pet food to shoes to mowers to fishing equipment to snacks. It's a wide array of things. So we have a million different niches. Any company's audience is going to be the same thing in different niches. So if you can find somebody else who is serving the niche better than you, well, obviously that's a good thing to compare yourself to, and then again tweak the ideas. Don't steal directly, but you can tweak
Yeah.
it to what your brand might want to do.
Love it. Love it. Fantastic advice. Folks, we're talking with Nathaniel Jones about ways that social media managers can realistically inject innovation into their strategy. And I've got several more questions. But first, let's make sure that you've got a mechanism in place to know whether or not your strategies are actually paying off.
Actually can't say enough great things about the reporting with Agora Pulse. I feel like that is my job security every month. My clients aren't that active on social media, which is why they have me manage their profiles for them. And when they get that report, it verifies that they're making a good investment.
The metrics downloads are so simple and easy to read, and it really helps me show where we are doing things right on social and where we need to improve.
So I think one of the main reasons why we decided to move to Agora Pulse is because it's a more comprehensive, integrated tool for all of our marketing needs. So rather than what we have had to do historically with Sprout, which is use certain parts of that platform that work really well and then supplement it with other outside tools, by moving to Agora Pulse, we were able to keep all of that into one technology platform, which is not only a time saver, but it also makes sure that our analytics and all of our reporting's on point because we're pulling all from the same source.
It's a really great platform for agencies. It makes it really easy to manage, but gives me really, really, really robust information that actually helps me develop better strategies for my clients and better plans of action.
So, Nathaniel, obviously the core tenet with innovation is coming up with new ideas. Are there specific strategies that you have in place that you've thought through, or frameworks perhaps, to help you and your team continuously come up with new ideas?
Yeah, it comes easier to some people than others. I think if you can naturally watch something or consume something and say, how can I do that? It makes it easier. But I think from a team standpoint is always asking, what would you want to see? We kind of talked about those niches earlier of there's everybody from a 5-year-old to a 105-year-old that might be watching your content. So you always have to be thoughtful of that. And I think sometimes marketers can get confined in a box of like, this is what's possible, this is what the brand would fit, and I would encourage them to break out of that box. So if you see something on TikTok, if you see something on SNL, or if you see something on a movie that you watched of that kind of sparks the idea, I think the more content you consume and the more things you see that are inspiring, informative, or engaging, then that can help lift your overall creativity. So don't be handcuffed to what you did last year. Make a new path every single day, every quarter, every year. Sometimes we as marketers get locked into a marketing calendar of doing the same things each year, or repurposing things that might have worked in the past. But we almost start fresh every single day of, can we come up with something that we didn't do last year? Again, that challenging thing.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, SNL is great, but I'd be cautious about using SNL for inspiration. Most of the
Well,
commercials we see on SNL are mocking other people's commercials.
correct, but that's the anti-marketing, right? Is like you're speaking to people. So what other people might find funny, you use that. I'm a dad, and I see you have dad there in the background. So dad jokes are super important to me. So a lot of the content that we create is around that corniness or the dad jokiness that I have. Be yourself. I think Gary Vee says that a lot, is don't fake another personality. Be true to yourself. And so a lot of creativity can come out of that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And one of the other things that you said that really struck me was that not everyone is necessarily good at creating ideas or can create ideas at the same pace. So I was just wondering, how do you identify that? Is it just trial and error and eventually you realize, oh, okay, this person's probably not an ideal person, or they need whatever? Or
Yep.
have you, are there certain questions you ask or a framework that you might follow?
Yeah, some of it can be taught, I think,
Mhm.
especially being young into marketing, going out for the first time. You don't have the experience to go off of what works or what's possible. But again, consuming the content, you'll learn, hey, that's kind of interesting. Could we try that? Bring ideas. There's not a lot of things that I think that we say no to. And I think that's important of, let's just try it. Why be so constrained to what you think might work? Try it and see if it will work. Chat GPT is another tool that I find great to bounce ideas off of, and I encourage others to use too. That if you feel in a writer's block of coming up with creativity or innovation, start a conversation. It's almost like a partner that you can have, a sparring partner on brainstorming that you can have of, hey, give me 10 ideas for a short video concept about real estate. Be amazed by the stuff that thing it can spit out.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love AI. I have a whole nother podcast about AI, in fact. And one of the things I talk about there is that you can customize the AI and teach it everything about who you are, the role that you're playing, whether you're a social media director, marketing, or whatever. Give it your goals and your target audience, and of course your voice. And then it is like having a work buddy. In fact, I have an article about it at theaihat.com/AI work buddy. Those of you listening, you can go learn about what we were just talking about there, because it's a huge asset for everybody today. But I'm wondering, when it comes to these kinds of campaigns that you're running, you're putting them out on social media specifically, right? Obviously, paid ads is a little bit different, because social media, one of the challenges that a lot of the folks in our audience have is knowing what works. It's really hard unless you're just looking at vanity metrics to know sometimes, was this really effective? Did this have any impact on the business? How are you measuring those kinds of things?
Yeah, sometimes being asked like what the impact of social media is asking what the ROI of your mom is. It had an impact. Sometimes it's hard to put the exact finger on it, especially for brick and mortar, because like we said, there's not too many tools out there can measure the direct correlation between somebody seeing your ad and then went to your store. So number one, in my opinion, what social media is built for is to be engaging and is to build your brand. So I think instead of being so transactional based, which I know a lot of times the proof is in the pudding to executives, but try to preach patience as much as possible, that it's all about uplifting the number of people who see your brand or drawn to your brand through awareness and getting that attention. That's the number one step before you can sell anything. So as long as you're building your audience, you're building the engagement, social media and the content you produce is doing its job. Sales will come eventually as long as you have that awareness. But the hardest step is breaking through the noise and getting attention and awareness first. In my opinion, you need to do that first, and sales will come after that. And then you can try to test in a vacuum if you are looking for a transaction. So run a piece of content, creative video campaign against one category, one event, or maybe one item, and then measure the lift of that sales. Don't advertise it anywhere else except on social media. Even if you want to test different social media channels, like advertise this only on TikTok, advertise that only on Meta, and see the results with the sales difference inside the store. But again, you got to be willing to test it in a vacuum and nowhere else. So you got to hedge your bet, pick your gamble on which products and categories that you want to test that with.
Fantastic advice. Our previous guest had a very different take, but the clarification was he worked for Black Ovis. I'm talking about Adam Buchanan, who is working for a primarily e-commerce brand, and so they can push a lot of direct traffic from social media and measure that A to B to C, right? Where when you're in a brick and mortar, it's a completely different ball game. I feel like, and to your point, then the role of social media becomes almost exclusively, brand awareness and engagement and top of mind, and maybe some product awareness too, for sure. But yeah, getting them to actually walk in, it's great when it happens, but it's hard to know for sure.
But Mike, I'm glad you brought up the e-com standpoint too, because for people who drive e-commerce business, a lot of it is transactional, but there's a really thin line between getting clicks and driving transactions and it being 100% sell too, right? It's tough to build a social audience when you're strictly just e-commerce, because you're so much leaned into, I got to make this work for me on a money basis. And so 100% of the content's going to be that right hook of I'm selling people. And then your audience starts to get less engaged. So again, if it's working, it's working. But if you start to see that kind of dip down of I'm losing fans, I'm losing followers, there's not engagement there, then you're probably over the top on being that sales pitch rather than a social pitch.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's a callback to your original Gary Vaynerchuk reference. There's no jab, 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 which you have to have for that right hook to be successful. So appreciate that. Are there any specific tools or platforms you've found that have been particularly helpful in these kinds of innovative marketing efforts?
Yeah, so CapCut, are you familiar with CapCut?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so we discovered that probably a year and a half ago. Same ByteDance owns it, the same company that owns TikTok. but the video editing in that far surpass anything else that we've tried. I've been in video editing for a long time, starting with the news industry and TV news. But that what you're able to do using AI and the text templates and the transitions and the frames and the filters, it just blows my mind how intuitive that platform is, and what you can do with just a very short learning curve. So I think it takes the fear sometimes I think marketers have of doing it themselves away. And I would encourage even directors of marketing, and you don't have a video background, if you can see what that platform can do, it would save hours and days and months of time in order to put out more content. Because Gary Vee and I are aligned, as you put enough good stuff out. Do you allow cussing on your show?
Yeah.
Okay. Put the good shit out and good shit will come. So we put as much stuff as possible out there, as long as it's good stuff. Yeah, you can spam your audience, but I'm of the belief that there's a void that can never be filled with social media, because so much time is spent there currently by all ages. So you need to fill that with as much stuff from your company or your personal brand that you can, in order to get visible and cut through that noise. So CapCut definitely helps with that, producing more content, and in a great polished way that I really like. And then we talked about ChatGPT, of using that for thought concepts, and even looking at competitors' websites or social media and trying to brainstorm ideas off of that. We found that pretty beneficial recently. And then have you ever messed around with TikTok trends, especially within transitions?
Yes. In fact, I had one of TikTok's product managers on an interview show last year talking about it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so those transitions into TikTok, if you can see, clothing and jewelry are some of the ones that are pretty high up. Sports is starting to use a lot more from what I've seen. So if you see some of those transitions within inside of TikTok that are on the up and up, that can give you a leg up on competition potentially, that maybe aren't experimenting with some of those editing capabilities.
Yeah, fantastic recommendations. Love CapCut. Opus Clip is another tool we've used and worked with. Wondershare Filmora is another example. One of the things that I love about all these tools is that they're making it just easier and easier every day for folks who are not professional video editors to create good, maybe not great video, at least good, maybe
Yeah.
even great, depending on, just how innovative, inspiring you were.
Yeah.
But
And
it
that's
makes
what,
me
if I can,
wonder. Oh, go ahead.
if I can talk about that good. So I think a lot of people use social media as the new broadcast, especially say TV. It's got to look a certain way, right? And the more we experiment with content, the more we realize that, especially on social media, people are looking for stuff that looks friendly. Sometimes it isn't polished. So I think sometimes marketers get in this belief that it has to look good in order to work. It really doesn't, because sometimes the things that might appear a little bit off or askew or potentially grainy sometimes, as long as what you're saying is important or informative or funny, then that's okay. That's really all that matters. It's the, how does it get awareness, right? The attention, that's the first task. So marketers tend to overthink. I think creatives tend to overthink sometimes. There's this perfectionist thing that lives deep inside of us, of the thing that I have to put out, the thing that I'm creating has to be perfect in the way that I want it to be. But sometimes it's quantity more than quality. It's great if you can have both, but quality, I think, overtakes quantity sometimes.
Yeah, quality of production, not necessarily quality of content. But yeah, that was actually the exact point that TikTok product manager made last year, because they were seeing that in the data, that not only was UGC content outperforming everything else, but brand created content that had the look and feel of UGC content. Right, they deliberately went at it with a low production value approach, was outperforming everything else. So that's taking a stab at quite correctly our perfectionist selves, right, and making sure that we don't have to put out perfect, we don't have to put out great. Good is often good enough. That's with the content itself. But what happens when the campaign does not perform at that kind of a level? You've got some innovative campaign, you took a risk, doesn't perform as expected. What do you do next? How do you learn from that?
So you're going to lose. I hate losing, absolutely despise it, but failures are going to happen. And it's inevitable in life, especially if you're trying a lot of shit. It's going to happen to where it's just not going to hit. So either you can try it again if you felt like it was the right move or maybe bad timing, or try something else. There's really only two options that you have. So it's whether or not you feel strongly enough about that campaign, that creative. Maybe it's just bad timing. Example I have is Super Bowl, right? It's hard to push through what Super Bowl is. It's a behemoth in the media realm, even social media. Your whole newsfeed is going to be taken over by Super Bowl. Sometimes what you're pushing during that time frame isn't going to work just because so much attention is on that. Can you tie into the Super Bowl? Sure. If there's anything else, it might get pushed to the side. So it's just be cognizant of, from a timing standpoint, from an awareness standpoint, some things may not work, and you could either try it again with a tweak or move on to something else. I think always analyzing stuff in a vacuum is really tough. You always have to be cognizant of the other factors that went into it.
Terrific advice. I know you mentioned Gary Vee earlier. Are there any other thought leaders or resources that you turn to help you keep inspired and ahead of some of these marketing trends we've been talking through?
Yeah, I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. Some of them I call out as The Hustle and then Stacked Marketer. They're pretty ahead of the curve and seeing what's coming down the pipeline. Stacked Marketer has a lot of AI tools that I really like too. And then I think it's watching the trends on your own feed and asking your team to do the same. We kind of talk about the different niches that we serve. So somebody could be heavy into whatnot. Somebody could be heavy into Be Real. Somebody could be heavy into YouTube Shorts. Other ones into Reels. Other ones into TikTok, and all the different facets of content creation that was within them. So I think it's always being open to trying something. Staying ahead of the trends is tough. I use a phrase of riding the wave. So you try to ride it when the wave is high. It's nice to get it at the peak, but sometimes it might be coming down. But it's tough to start a trend on your own. So I don't know if it's necessarily possible to get ahead of a trend, but it's to ride that wave as much as possible. And always try to think of, again, challenge yourself. Yeah, we did this on Tuesday, but it may not work on Thursday, and that's fine. You just have to try and try and try.
Terrific advice, particularly the divide and conquer approach. That's really smart. If you've got a team, even if it's just 2 or 3 other people that you can turn to and ask one or both of them to follow trends and pay attention to other platforms so you aren't spread quite so thin if social media is your responsibility, those of you listening. But Nathaniel, you've been amazing. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I know folks are going to go back and listen to it again, but if they've got more questions for you, if they want to reach out and get a hold of you, where should they go?
Sure, you can go in LinkedIn. I'm there, or njones@farmandhomesupply.com. I'll give my email straight out, and you can reach out to me at any time. I always like talking with other marketers, especially with those that like from an innovative standpoint and have a like mind of analyzing what you're doing. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat sometime.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. Thank you, all of you, for listening. As always, we'll have all the links in the show notes below. But don't forget to find the Social Pulse Podcast Retail Edition on Apple, because if you like this show, rate it and drop me a review. I'd love to know what you think. Until next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of Social Pulse Podcast Retail Edition, hosted by Mike Alton and powered by AgoraPulse, the #1 rated social media management solution, which you can learn more about at agorapulse.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player and be sure to leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us.